Kono Weeaboo Warrior Da. Get ready to experience the first part of my JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Strength and Power tier list series. In this video, I'll be ranking the characters from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 1, Phantom Blood, in terms of strength and power. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the future parts. You're in for one bizarre Weeaboo adventure. Starting off at the low human tier, at the bottom of this bizarre tier list, we have a very bizarre entry. This bottom spot belongs to the strange chimera creatures that Dio made. They're small, don't seem to have any combat ability, and should easily be crushed underfoot by any of the characters above. I have to wonder why Dio would create these creepy little creatures, but maybe he finds them cute for some odd reason. Either that, or he just gets off on killing them. Arena is the weakest human on the list, being a non-combatant woman pretty much there just to be a damsel in distress and to pass on the Jojo lineage. Maybe as an adult she would be above the 4 adolescents above her, but as a young girl she would definitely be below them. Poco is also a bottom tier human, getting slapped around by just about everyone. His only real defense technique is peeing himself, though he did end up showing some courage and didn't die when he got knocked back by Tarkus. Jonathan Joestar at the beginning of the series was a weak, pampered rich kid who got the snot kicked out of him by the bullies above him, which is why they're in this order. He's got more guts than Poco, so he would still probably triumph over him. Poco's sister is another story entirely. She's the opposite of her brother, as she's the one doing the slapping rather than being slapped. She even managed to make Dio bleed with one of her slaps. Danny made it to this spot just due to the fact he's a large dog, and he could probably just maul everyone below him. Jonathan, after getting some fighting experience, managed to impress Dio a bit and did better than Danny against him. So while still kinda pathetic, he's at least the top tier in terms of patheticness. Or maybe he's the bottom tier in patheticness, however that would go. Moving up to the mid-human tier, Kono Dio da! Dio before the time skip was a skilled and devious fighter, not afraid to go for cheap shots. He easily defeated both Danny and Jonathan, putting him a tier above them. After Dio stole Arena's first kiss, Jonathan got a cuck power-up and his rage allowed him to overcome Dio. This is where Dio learned the harder you cuck him, the harder you hit him, the tougher he gets. You could also argue Dio should be above him because he has a knife on him, but we didn't get to see him use it, and it's possible Jonathan would have still won. Either way, in a fair fight, Jonathan would be above him at that point. The next 3 characters are the thugs that were with Speedwagon. They're hardened criminals with weapons, so they should go above the 2 young teens. Speedwagon has a bladed hat that he can throw that cut an adult Jonathan down to the bone. And he also has a gun that he used to shoot Dio in the head with. He even managed to temporarily hold off a zombie. Next is the high human tier, filled only by Jonathan and Dio after the time skip, but before they got any supernatural powers. At 6'5" and jacked to the gills, these 2 are at the peak of what humanity can naturally achieve. If we go by real life standards, these 2 would actually be superhuman, especially Jonathan. It took 4 guys tackling him just to slow him down, and he was able to easily defeat Speedwagon and his goons while holding back. Dio could easily defeat street thugs as well, and even managed to react to and cut the arm of a vampire attacking him. But he lost pretty badly to Jonathan, and even as a vampire he ended up losing to that version of Jonathan in their first fight, so he definitely goes below him when he was only a regular human. Sucking their way into the low zombie tier, we have most of the named zombies and novice vampires. I almost put Jonathan before his hormone training here due to how easily he defeated human Dio and how he even managed to win against the Noob Vampire Dio, but his victory in that fight had a lot to do with luck, and in a fair fight, his strength just pales in comparison to the characters in this tier before his hormone training. Wang Chen was strong enough to stop a large boat's steam engine and was overpowering Jonathan when he couldn't use hormone. Mr. Adams has an extendable tongue that can lash out at his enemies. Doobie has venomous snakes in his head and was tough enough to survive an anvil being dropped on his head. Jack the Ripper put knives in his body so that he could launch out of himself by flexing, and also had a modified medieval torture device as a weapon as well. He was strong enough to toss a carriage with horses attached to it an extremely far distance, hard enough to collapse a tunnel entrance. Zombies are just creatures spawned from vampires to be controlled by them, so it makes sense these guys would go below the next 3 noob vampires. The first vampire we ever saw in action was the random street thug Dio turned with the mask. His strikes could destroy walls and send Dio flying and break his collarbone with an indirect hit. Zeppeli's father, after becoming a vampire, managed to kill his entire crew comprising of 58 men. Dio, right after obtaining his powers, is undoubtedly the strongest of the Noob Vampires. He could casually tear through people like tissue paper, throw people hard enough into others to make their bodies come apart, and stick his fingers into people to drain their blood, which turns them into zombies that he can control. Vampires are practically immortal, being able to take gunfire like nothing, and can even regenerate faster than most fires can burn them. They don't feel pain either, which is a deadly combo, as if at least they had fear of getting hurt, they might have some apprehension while fighting. But they don't have to worry about their bodies being destroyed or the pain that comes with it. The only thing they truly need to fear is the sun. Oh, and one more thing. Hamon. The high zombie tier is actually filled mostly with Hamon users. Hamon users can master the power of the sun to amplify their strength, heal themselves or others, create magnetic-like effects, walk on water, among other things. The power of Hamon specifically counters vampires and zombies due to its origin from the sun, and most zombies aren't a match for these masters. Ton Petty is basically the Hamon Grand Master and has the special ability to look into people's futures. His training allowed Zeppeli to run dozens of miles without losing his breath, so he and the other Hamon users should also have that kind of endurance as well. I put him below his disciples as we didn't see as much from him combat-wise, but he could still defeat Dio's fodder zombies quite easily. Straightso was able to kill 4 zombies at once by infusing his Hamon into a chandelier. Dyer is a man who will fight until the bitter end, even if all that remains of him is his head. He's capable of creating illusions, and his Thunder Crossblade attack surprised both Jonathan and Dio. Straightso said no fighter has ever escaped it, so putting him above Straightso makes sense. You could even use this to argue him above Zeppeli, but I think Baron Zeppeli just has too many feats to not put him as the highest Hamon user out of these 4. He can dislocate his shoulder to increase his striking distance with his Zoom Punch, using Hamon to dull the pain. His strikes can split stone, and he can even send these devastating shockwaves through things without hurting them if he so chooses. He can split knives launched hard enough to split stone with wine, and can block a knife strike from Jack the Ripper with the bottle. He does have his limits though, as he was unable to use Hamon to smash through a metal door. He got the better of the zombie Jack the Ripper without spilling a drop of wine, and easily defeated a bunch of other zombies simultaneously. However, there are some zombies that he can't defeat. Tarkus and Bluford are on another level when compared to the other zombies. Bluford was able to blitz another zombie and take his nose, his speed and power impressing Jonathan and Zeppeli. He's armed with a sword, but his most dangerous weapon is his hair, that he can control like tendrils which can pierce through flesh and drain his opponent's blood. Jonathan, after his Hamon training, just barely managed to defeat him. Tarkus thought of himself as stronger than Bluford, and he would have defeated Jonathan if there wasn't any outside interference. However, he had the home field advantage, as he forced Jonathan into a chain deathmatch which was stated to be his specialty, and he had killed 48 people previously in the same method. He's insanely strong, being able to lift and crush a massive boulder with just one finger. He could also swing a sword that dwarfed Jonathan's 195cm frame and crumble cliff sides with it. He took an impact that should have annihilated his flesh and bones, and since zombies can't regenerate like vampires, this means that he just tanked that force. This makes sense considering even when he was alive, apparently multiple axes were broken trying to execute him. He killed Zeppeli in the middle of his chain deathmatch with Jonathan, so he undoubtedly goes above him. Jonathan, after his Hamon training, could arguably be placed between Bluford and Tarkus, but due to the statement mentioning how he is weakened from the Bluford fight, and another statement specifically mentioning how he can't defeat both Bluford and Tarkus at once, I like to think in a fair fight at his best, Jonathan could have defeated either of them in a 1v1. He also managed to block a freezing punch from Dio meant to finish off Zeppeli, so I think that clearly proved that Jonathan surpassed Zeppeli by that point. The Vampire tier is next, and this is another tier filled by just Jonathan and Dio. Dio at the end of part 1 while just ahead, has more mastery over his vampire powers at that point than any time previously, but at the same time he's at his most vulnerable since he's just ahead. He's still able to use his laser eye ability, which is really just him shooting out pressurized fluid jets from his eyes. And with this ability he was still fully capable of piercing through Jonathan and leaving a mortal wound. He isn't completely immobile either, as he can control both his hair and the blood vessels in his neck to move himself or objects around him. Jonathan, after being given all of Baron Zeppeli's life energy, became strong enough to easily defeat Tarkus. He infused his Hamon into Doobie snakes, controlling them to turn on their master and kill him with their Hamon-infused fangs. He's a veteran fighter who managed to cut off Dio's arm and then cut him down the middle by abusing his blind spot, and then later won the fight by adding fire to his Hamon-infused fist to counter Dio's freezing ability. You could argue Head Dio should still be above Jonathan due to his eye beams that Jonathan was basically at the mercy of, but he did have Wang Chen's help and Jonathan wasn't really ready for a fight. I think in a 1v1 fight on an equal playing field, a prime Jonathan would probably take the edge over Dio while he was just ahead. But the full body is another matter entirely. At the top of the tier list is Dio after mastering all of his vampire abilities, but before losing his head. Dio found a way to counter Hamon users by vaporizing the moisture in his body, which flash freezes anything he's touching. He easily stopped Zeppeli's and Jonathan's Hamon-infused attacks with this ability, and killed Dire with it as well. It was stated he could freeze Jonathan's entire body within 2 seconds flat. Right before losing his head is when he first used his eye beam ability, and he was able to slice right through a stone pillar with it. And in the anime, he split the roof of a building and the clouds. He can also hypnotize people, so he can call on people to help him fight, or possibly just make his opponent submit to him. He was stated to be as fast as a leopard, and his hands could cut through a sword with ease. Jonathan did end up beating him, but that was after Dio's fight with Dire, which Jonathan analyzed and ended up using the blind spot created from Dire's attack to give him the edge. Even then, splitting Dio down the middle wasn't enough to defeat him, and Jonathan would have lost if not for Fire being close at hand to help him counter Dio's freezing ability. Zeppeli said that Dio was 5 times stronger than him and Jonathan put together, so that should mean he's 5 times stronger than Jonathan after absorbing Zeppeli's power. Dio also didn't use his laser eye ability until it was already too late, possibly because he just unlocked it in a desperate attempt to survive. And we later see that when he's just ahead, he could easily use it on command to pierce Jonathan. I think based off all this information, it's clear a fresh Dio with all of his powers unlocked stands atop this tier list, and nothing but the sun would take him down. We're at the end of this bizarre tier list, but we're only at the beginning of this adventure. Like I mentioned, I'll be making a tier list for the rest of the parts, so subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss them. Let me know what your thoughts are on this list in the comment section below. See you guys at part 2. Oh wait, one more thing, I forgot something really important. I have to tell you guys that